Less than 150 years ago, a notorious bushranger was put to death. He was only 25. Today, he is a great Australian legend. His name is Ned Kelly. For many, he is the nation's first revolutionary, a persecuted hero who fought to tear his country from the shackles of Mother England and free his people from the corruption of British rule. Ironclad and dressed for battle, he was our very own knight in shining armor. But to others, he does not deserve his place as our national treasure. Ned Kelly was nothing more than a crazed outlaw, horse thief, bank robber, cop killer. Today, the legend is being cleaned up with award-winning novels, a glossy feature film, and the electric world debut of hundreds of Ned Kellys at the Sydney 2000 Olympics. Time is running out to question the myth. Is this man Australia's greatest rebel hero, or simply a murderous thug?
When you take it back down to the bare bones, it was about someone saying, hey, we need to have a go. This is our country. We've come out from a place of oppression. We're going to make this our country. And if it's not right, well, then we can fight for it.
For poor Irish families like the Kellys, who had settled in the 19th century colony of Victoria, Australia was supposed to be a promised land. But the same rich English landlords and their police stooges they had left behind also ruled this far-flung corner of the British Empire. Ned Kelly was of Irish stock, but his was the anger of a first-generation Australian.
Is my brothers and sisters and my mother not to be pitied also, who has no alternative only to put up with the brutal and cowardly conduct of a parcel of big, ugly, fat-necked, wombat-headed, big-bellied, magpie-legged, narrow-hipped, splaw-footed sons of Irish bailiffs or English landlords, which is better known as officers of justice or Victorian police, who some calls honest gentlemen.
When his father, a freed convict, died in 1866, his mother, Ellen, finally secured a meagre parcel of land for herself and her brood of children here in Greta, a few days' ride from the colony's capital, Melbourne.
Ellen Kelly was my great-grandmother. Her daughter, Grace, was my grandmother. So Ned was my father's uncle.
Where they came from in Ireland is beautiful land, using the old language, 40, 50, 60 feet of topsoil. They came here to a property that may have had half an inch of topsoil. I wouldn't be real positive of the rainfall over there, but 80 to 100 inches of rain per year. Here they had 20, 22. It must have been heartbreaking.
Just to hold on to their plot, the harsh laws of this new land demanded the Kellys clear it of trees and scrub and harvest crops. But once cleared, it was little more than a dust bowl.
There you have very poor soil, very little topsoil. What topsoil there is, you would lose if you were to crop it. And of interest, this would probably be one of the main implements the family would have had to clear their land. You can see mine's almost brand new. I intend to pass it on to my children like that.
The Kellys weren't just up against the elements. They were up against the big boys. Melbourne was a slick, brash new town, basking in the riches of the recent gold rush. Here gathered the squatters, mainly English-moneyed landowners who had aggressively monopolised the cream of the land. If the Kellys failed, they would forfeit their property, and the squatters, always greedy for more, were ready to pounce. Ned Kelly would find a way to fight back. With his brother Dan, his cousin Thomas Lloyd, and his local mates Joe Byrne and Steve Hart, he ran his own pioneer version of a street gang, the Greeter Mob.
The Greeter Mob, like all the mobs, had a characteristic uniform, for want of a better word, and for the Greeter Mob it was a hat with the hat band strapped under the nose. God alone knows why they chose it, because it must have been impossible, almost impossible to breathe, but they thought they looked really flash.
I'm descended from Thomas Peter Lloyd, who was Ned's first cousin and closest friend, and also from Steve Hart, so I have a connection to 3 out of 4 members of the gang. I get a picture of Ned and the boys as being naughty to start off with, you know, real larrikins who liked racing their horses around, doing things that was considered sport then. They were excellent horsemen, so what better way to show off your skill than to tear around the countryside, jumping fences, you know, stealing something just because you can, showing that this is what you can do.
Ned Kelly's gang came up with a quick fix solution to keep bread on the table.
One of the greatest ways to earn quick pocket money was to nick the local squatter's thoroughbred, hide it, called planting it, wait till the reward was posted and then say, look what I found, give me my £50 or whatever. And some, like the Kellys, took it up as a profession, although Ned Kelly used to refer to it as wholesale and retail, horse and cattle dealing.
The squatters were losing hundreds of horses, and they knew exactly who was to blame. They wanted the Kelly boys hounded out of the colony. For that, they were going to have to pull a few strings. It was here, under the roof of the Melbourne Club, that all the bigwigs gathered and all the big decisions were made.
It was the power centre, really, the unofficial power centre of Melbourne. And you'd get the big property owners, the big squatters, they'd be mingling with judges, with barristers, and you know, politicians would be there also. Those days, I think most of the deals done there would have been a lot more to do with control, really, controlling who's got what, and squatters having problems, you know, might have a quiet word to a judge or barrister and see if something could be done here, or is there some way around this that we could solve this problem.
The man the squatters turned to solve the Kelly problem was the colony's Chief Commissioner of Police, Captain Frederick Standish, the club's most colourful resident member. Standish was a dandy. He had escaped gambling debts in England and under a false name headed for a new life in the colonies. Known as a procurer of women for his pals at the club, his own diaries tell how he hosted some of the most louche parties in Melbourne. Quite the rogue himself, he was just the man to take on a scoundrel like Ned Kelly.
It's in the mid to late 1870s that Captain Standish begins to develop a policy which is designed to move the Kellys and the clan out of Victoria, out of the colony, into New South Wales. And it's phrased very curiously. It says, without worrying or oppressing the people in any way, bust them on any charge you can.
This police harassment would ultimately force Ned down a road that would soon leave men dead and a country in turmoil. For into the fray stumbled the disreputable local police officer from Greeter, Constable Alexander Fitzpatrick.
He's known for his penchant for drinking with the wrong sorts of people in the district. He's not seen as particularly trustworthy by his immediate superiors. But Fitzpatrick gets it into his head that if he goes to the Kelly house and arrests Ned and his brother Dan, all his problems will be over.
No one has ever really got to the bottom of what happened inside that cabin that fateful evening in April 1878. Fitzpatrick's official crime report was highly questionable. But he claimed when he arrived to arrest the Kelly brothers for horse theft, only Dan was there. Fitzpatrick knew the Kellys well, and because they were eating, sat down with them. He later testified that when he revealed the purpose of his visit, a scuffle broke out, Ellen violently opposing her son's arrest. Without warning, Ned arrived. The bullet grazed Constable Fitzpatrick's hand. The constable claimed as he ran for his life, Ellen hit him over the head with a shovel. He left shaken and bloody with a deep gash to his wrist. For a policeman in trouble with his superiors, it was a gift on a plate. He ran straight to the police headquarters with the story that Ned and his mother Ellen had tried to kill him.
The Chief Commissioner of Police, Standish, just doesn't believe a word of it. He says it's been concocted from beginning to end. But that doesn't matter. Fitzpatrick comes back to Benalla with a tale of attempted murder. Attempted murder.
It was all Police Chief Standish needed, and it would please his squatter friends no end. A word in the ear of a sympathetic judge at the club sealed the fate of the Kelly clan. As soon as they heard they were wanted men, Ned and Dan fled, but their mother, her 3-day-old baby in tow, was wrenched away from her family. She was sentenced to 3 years hard labor. Just a year before his death, Ned dictated a letter to his more literate best friend, Joe Byrne, that made plain his horror at the unjust treatment of his mother. It is known as the Jerilderie Letter.
The police got great credit and praise in the papers for arresting the mother of 12 children, one an infant on her breast. This sort of cruelty and disgraceful and cowardly conduct made my blood boil, as I don't think there is a man born could have the patience to suffer it as long as I did, or ever allowed his blood to get cold while insults such as these were unavenged.
But his own words suggest an even grimmer truth. Fitzpatrick was lying. That night, Ned wasn't even there.
I heard nothing of this transaction until very close on the trial. I been then over 400 miles from Greta when I heard I was outlawed and £100 reward for me for shooting at a trooper in Victoria.
But what if the criminal profiling techniques of today could cast their forensic gaze on history and discover once and for all what happened that night? FBI-trained profiler Steve Longford has helped track down some of Australia's most notorious killers and extortionists. He believes a secret is tucked away in Ned's Jerilderie Letter. For pages and pages, Ned rants against Constable Fitzpatrick.
That Fitzpatrick will be the cause of greater slaughter to the Union Jack than St. Patrick was to the snakes and toads in Ireland. I have heard from a trooper that he never knew Fitzpatrick to be one night sober and that he sold his sister to a Chinaman.
What if Ned's ranting revealed a different version of events? That he was lying about being 400 miles away. He was there that night. But also that Constable Fitzpatrick was lying. he wasn't there to arrest the Kelly boys at all.
The deceit and cowardice is too plain to be seen in the puny, cabbage-hearted looking face.
That is a very personal attack. He's giving it, within the context of the letter, quite a bit of space. Now, from a behavioural context, in order for me to develop that type of hate, there must be some form of betrayal. I must have formed some relationship, some sort of attachment, some sort of activity that we engaged in that made me believe that we had a relationship, and that relationship's been betrayed.
In his own letter, Ned goes to extraordinary lengths to expose corruption within the police force. In 12 instances, he speaks of their dishonesty, and on 2 occasions specifically tells of their involvement in horse theft.
We know that the police were involved in stealing horses, so there is a very strong possibility that Ned Kelly was at some point in time in collusion, in particular with the police officer Fitzpatrick, and may have had some relationship with Fitzpatrick, which went bad.
It is very possible that Ned Kelly was framed by Fitzpatrick, but only because the constable was trying to hide a crooked deal that had gone sour. Whoever is to be believed, the outcome was the same. The matriarch of the Kelly clan was locked up in prison, her 2 sons permanently chased off their own land. The 5 young Kelly sisters, with their mother gone, were left to fend for themselves.
The girls were left with no money and no income whatsoever. They only had a horse and a cow, and after Ned fled, the police actually poisoned their dam so that Ned couldn't come at night to visit and water his horse. And in the process of poisoning that dam, they poisoned the horse and the cows, and so the family were left with absolutely nothing. They couldn't even milk the cow to get some milk.
This relentless persecution of the family undeniably primed Ned to start his own personal war against the police. When he heard Chief Commissioner Standish had sent out 2 squads to hunt him down, he and Dan retreated into the tangle of stringy bark forests deep in the Wombat Ranges. There, with their 2 mates Joe Byrne and Steve Hart, they made ready to turn the hunters into the hunted.
Stringy Bark Creek is the real toughie in the Kelly story. It's the make or break when it comes to people's attitude towards Ned Kelly. And the reason is that at Stringy Bark Creek, 3 policemen are shot dead. And no matter how you try and explain it, 3 men are murdered.
One of the police posses was camped at Stringy Bark Creek. While 2 policemen were out scouring the country for Ned, Constables Lonigan and McIntyre were left behind to hunt parrots for dinner.
Right from the moment that the Kelly gang were aware that the police were nearby, they had an opportunity to ride away and avoid a confrontation. So there was never any need for a confrontation at any point, particularly given that the Kellys were such good bushmen. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for the Kellys just to ride off and seek sanctuary somewhere else.
But they didn't. Ned and his gang seized the moment. Within seconds, Ned shot Lonigan dead. Soon, the other 2 officers returned. They were taken totally by surprise. Within a matter of minutes, 2 more policemen had been murdered, Constable Michael Scanlon and Sergeant Michael Kennedy. Only one of the party escaped with his life.
I could not have been more sorry for them. This cannot be called willful murder. Those men came into the bush with the intention of scattering pieces of me and my brother all over the bush.
For those who want Ned Kelly to go down in the history books as a hero, there has to be some evidence for his conviction that he only killed in self-defense.
According to Ned Kelly, the police party at Stringybark Creek had but one purpose in mind. They came heavily armed with Martini Henry rifles. These are the state of the art in modern weaponry. This is a clear indication that the police meant business. But if that was not enough, far more insidiously were these innocent-looking straps, what were called undertakers. The straps were made so that they could pack a body across the length of a horse and bring it out of the bush after a man had been killed. They were frequently used for mining accidents and the like. But when a police party went into the bush carrying these straps, Kelly believed he would be brought in dead rather than alive.
There's no doubt that if you're actually going to hunt down someone like Ned Kelly and his gang, you don't go out with pea shooters. You go out heavily armed, and you go out with body bags, expecting to complete what you're actually asked to do. And Ned Kelly would have expected for them to be heavily armed and to try and blast their way out of a potential ambush or indeed take him. That was the way he operated. Ned Kelly was heavily armed as well.
The third police officer to be killed that day at Stringybark Creek was Sergeant Michael Kennedy.
My great-grandfather was a copper and he was shot by Ned Kelly. I can remember my grandfather, obviously, who was his son. I think he was about 2 years of age when his father was shot and murdered. My grandfather sort of would say very little about it. My whole family's hardly ever sort of spoken about it. It's almost been sort of in the dark. But I can remember as being a 5-year-old with the old Hopalong Cassidy cap guns, you know, those little Hopalong Cassidy cap guns. And I went up close to him, he was sitting in the chair. Anyway, I pulled the bloody trigger. Well, that was a mistake, wasn't it? Because, of course, what happened was, as soon as I did that, I got a little bit of a backhander and I remember the bum sliding across the floor. So obviously it had affected him, the fact that his father had been, in fact, shot by Ned Kelly.
Not only is Mick descended from the murdered Sergeant Kennedy, like his great-grandfather, he is also an officer with the Victoria Police.
If you were out here now and you were looking for Ned Kelly 100 years ago, I think you'd be just about cacking your pants, because he'd be out here somewhere and you certainly would have to be well and truly alert, and you'd have to be wondering, you know, what's happening, where he is, all that sort of thing.
It took the police 5 days to find Sergeant Kennedy's body. The grisly scene was captured in some of the first crime scene photographs ever taken in Australia.
The poor buggers, they would have barely had time to think, let alone draw a bloody gun or do anything about it. I mean, it would have been, hello, how's your mum? Thank mum for the rabbits, and bang.
Now Mick is ready to share new, incontrovertible evidence that Ned didn't act in self-defense. This was cold-blooded murder.
Well, the fog watch is gold, and it was given to my great-grandfather for catching rustlers. It still works, I might add. And then on the back, it's got his name inscribed in there. And it's a lovely watch, but the good part about it is When I hold the watch, it almost feels like I'm holding a bit of history. Ned Kelly actually touched it.
The watch was taken by Ned from the lifeless body of the man he'd just murdered. For years, it was kept hidden by the Kelly family, throughout Ned's trial and long after his own execution, before it was quietly and respectfully returned to the Kennedy family.
He was shot through the heart, not even a murmur, didn't even make a sound, dead as a dodo, and the watch got knocked off. You shoot somebody and kill them, then you steal from them. I mean, how lousy can you be? That's just lousy. It's cold-blooded.
Ned was front-page news. While the papers condemned him as a murderer, their readers didn't always agree. The crime scene photographs were selling like hotcakes on the streets of Melbourne. To many, Ned was becoming an outlaw hero. Captain Standish's response was merciless. Emergency legislation was passed to officially make Kelly an outlaw. And in just 1 year, the reward on his head would climb to £8,000, over $2 million today, and the largest in Australian police history. And cruelly, anyone suspected of aiding the Kelly gang could be arrested and blacklisted from holding land.
This is the original map of the parish of Lurg that shows all the original selections, and situated just over the back of those hills. The old Kelly block, which is just there, and surrounding that we have the land owned by the Kelly sympathisers. We have land of the Harts, the Lloyds down in the centre here, the Elliots, and up in the top corner here you have the McMonagals. Some of the sympathisers provided food and water and perhaps fresh horses for the gang, but a lot of them were nothing more than next door neighbours who actually knew the family and may have said hello of a Sunday morning.
Just before harvest time, the police forcibly removed 21 so-called Kelly sympathisers from their farms and held them in prison for months. Not a single one went to trial. The ruin it caused has never been forgiven. It still burns generations later.
The tensions between the police and still the families in the district. Certainly I have a good relationship with the local police, but, you know, we're on opposite sides of the fence, and it still shows and still will. We're really trying to build some of those bridges and go, it's time for reconciliation. It's all past.
Police Chief Standish's actions totally backfired. Ned was handed a support base that for the next year kept his gang hidden and stocked with guns. But for Ned, it wasn't enough. A ballsy bank heist or two would let him pay them back and, even better, get the whole country talking. The first raid was in the small hamlet of Euroa, but the main event would take place in Jerilderie. Jerilderie is not even in Victoria. It's across the border in the state of New South Wales. Once in town, they fooled the local cops and took them prisoner. They took 30 townsfolk hostage and shut them into the local hotel. They even laid on the drinks. And at the telegraph office, they smashed the lines, so not a peep got back to Police Chief Standish in Melbourne. At the bank, now a petrol station, Ned could take his time.
The raid itself has all the extraordinary hallmarks of a typical Kelly story. It's got that odd mixture of adventure and farce and humour, as well as threat locked into it. So, for example, the police are bailed up on the Saturday night and they're locked up in their own cells. The Kellys dress up as police constables and they masquerade in the town as policemen. They visit the shops They charge things up to the New South Wales government. No one is killed, and no one really seems to believe that they're in danger of being killed. There's an element of theatre here.
The bank tellers were caught totally off guard. The gang made off with over £2,000. For Ned, it wasn't just about making a laughingstock of the police. He now wanted vengeance for the persecution of his people. He burnt the mortgage deeds of all the poverty-stricken farmers in the district. It was a warning shot aimed directly at the establishment.
The key to it always is the fact that they seemed to carry out this raid with impunity, that officialdom was held hostage, that these men could come and do whatever they wanted to.
There was another reason for targeting Jerilderie. Its local newspaper. Ned now wanted his side of the story published. In the angry 56 pages he dictated to his friend Joe Byrne, known as the Jerilderie Letter, his scorn pours onto the paper. More than just an excuse for his actions, it was a declaration of war.
A policeman is a disgrace to his country, not alone to the mother that suckled him. In the first place, he is a rogue in his heart, but too cowardly to follow it up without having the force to disguise it. Next, he is traitor to his country, ancestors and religion, as they were all Catholics before the Saxons and Cranmore yoke held sway.
The Jerilderie Letter to me is something of Ned needing to explain his actions. I don't believe that Ned and the boys were monsters, and I don't think that they wanted to be seen as monsters. I think it's like, well, this is what we've done, but there's an explanation for it and you need to know.
I could not believe the Jerilderie Letter when I read it. It was the moan of an adolescent who had never grown up, who was irritated by people who were asking him to do things he didn't like, and who wrote this long, discursive piece of utter tripe.
The newspaper editor refused to publish the letter and handed it straight to the police. For over 50 years, it lay hidden away in the police archives in Melbourne. Now, for the first time, from a painstaking examination of the letter, Steve Longford has built up a psychological portrait of Ned Kelly.
It will pay government to give those people who are suffering innocence, justice and liberty. If not, I will be compelled to show some colonial stratagem which will open the eyes of not only the Victorian police and inhabitants, but also the whole British Army.
The egocentricity of Ned Kelly is something that's borne out when we see that he firmly and honestly believes that if he was to die, the police would have no job. The police would have nothing to do because Ned Kelly would be dead, and he states that twice in his letter.
But the letter does more than reveal Ned Kelly's egotism. It contains a threat levelled squarely at the police and anyone who stood with them.
I am called the blackest and coldest-blooded murder ever on record. But if I hear any more of it, I will not exactly show them what cold-blooded murder is, but wholesale and retail slaughter. I am a widow's son outlawed, and my orders must be obeyed.
We're getting some insight into a guy that is becoming an irrational man. He's leaving no choice for himself. The closest analogy in modern day terms would be the type of person who goes into a store, shoots some people, and has a siege that lasts for 3 days, 4 days, and then causes a situation where the police must kill him. And I think the terminology suicide by cop is used in that regard. And I think we're getting some insight that perhaps this is a path that Ned Kelly was starting to head down.
Only Captain Standish and the police top brass knew about the threat of violence. They hid the letter from the public for fear of a rural rebellion and ignored Ned Kelly's prophecy. In hindsight, it was a terrible mistake. There would be wholesale and retail slaughter. Kelly was preparing his grand finale. Glenrowan is a dusty little town in the heart of Kelly country. It was here in June 1880 that Ned struck again. Many here not only knew him after the Jerilderie bank raid, they saw him as their champion. So, when the gang rounded up 60 locals and holed them up in the town pub, the Glenrowan Inn, most were more than happy to play the part of hostage in the latest chapter of the Kelly saga.
My great-grandfather was David Mortimer. He was one of the hostages at the Glenrowan Inn during the Kelly siege. At some stage, Ned decided they would have a dance. Dave was chosen to play the concertina and call the sets. Some were definitely sympathisers and they were there for that reason. They were definitely there to aid Ned. Others just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of them really feared Ned, and you must remember that they were all Glenrowanites and they all knew one another.
But they were blissfully unaware that Ned had a far more sinister plot in mind. For months, the gang had been preparing for the showdown. 4 armour suits had been made from old iron ploughs. Ned was going to lure the police into a trap. He knew that a special police train was on standby in Melbourne, ready to rush an entire division of 30 officers up to Kelly country the moment the gang was sighted. The gang broke cover in the most dramatic way. They gunned down a local man they suspected of being a police informant. It was the perfect bait. Ned knew it would bring the police train hurtling up through Glenrowan. The next step was to derail the train just outside the town. It would be a massacre.
Well, here we are on the railway line outside Glenrowan, which was a vital part of the Kelly gang strategy. And what Kelly planned to do was to simply take up large stretches of rail like this, remove them to one side as it came around the corner, around an embankment and a culvert.
It was certainly a well-planned operation on Ned's behalf.
It was extraordinarily well planned. Come over this way, we'll see where the train would go off down an embankment. And it's here that Ned Kelly's armour came into play. And it's over this...
Right.
When you get down here, you can really see what the purpose of the armour was. You have the train derailed at the bottom of this embankment, and you think of this, the nature of the armour, the structure of it. It consists of 3 pieces: the helmet, which protects the head. You have the breastplate, which protects the body, the apron, which protects the upper thighs. And if you look up the slope to where Judith is standing, it becomes very clear that from here, if you're any of the police who survived that derailment, you cannot see the legs. The legs are protected by the angle of the embankment. The gang, from that position, could simply pick off any police survivors. And so in one blow, Kelly is able to wipe out over half the police force in the region in one single derailment.
In the context of the Australian environment, where terrorism is actually understood here from the IRA, Ned Kelly's attempt to derail the train at Glenrowan is a spectacular in terms of the Irish terms. This is a calculated act whereby you are in a position of some strength, you actually murder people as they get out of a train, and you create the largest possible example of your power and authority over the police in Victoria by undertaking this sort of action. It is a spectacular of an unseen, unprecedented scene in Victoria then or now.
After hours, the train had still not arrived, and the hostages were pressing Ned to let them go home. By now, it was no secret that he was planning to ambush the police. One man decided to take a stand, another of Judith's ancestors, Thomas Curnow.
All of the hostages said if they could have escaped, they would have escaped and gone for help. But Thomas went that one step further. He secured his own release and made Ned believe that he was with him heart and soul.
Thomas Curnow grabbed his sister's red llama wool scarf and ran to flag down the police train. Like everything that touched on the Kelly story, it is now treated like a holy relic.
This is a small piece of the bright red llama scarf that Thomas Curnow used to stop the train. The scarf itself, the red llama scarf, was torn into strips after the event and it was given away as mementos. So this is one of the pieces that are still in existence.
The plot to massacre the police had been foiled, and they now knew where the gang was hidden. The most famous shootout in Australian history was about to begin.
The police special pulls in cautiously over here to the station, and the men begin to pour off onto the platform. The man leading the police cried out, "Follow me, boys," and began to run across this length of ground here. At the same time, the Kelly brothers and the two other outlaws had come out of the front of the hotel and taken up their position here. Now, either the police opened fire first or the gang opened fire first, no one knows, but there was an exchange of gunfire. This is the first time the police even see who they're up against. It's only with the illuminations from the rifle shots they can see these monstrous shapes that don't look at all human.
Things were going from bad to worse. As the police fired on the inn for hours on end, 5 innocent hostages got caught in the crossfire. 4 of them would die. Now, the gang were about to lose one of their own. Joe Byrne, Ned's closest friend, had only just raised a glass to the Kelly gang when a barrage of police bullets pierced the wall of the hotel.
At some stage during the fighting, Ned was called on to surrender. The police called out to Ned, "Surrender in the name of the law." And Ned called back, "Surrender be buggered."
As the siege continued into the night, a cluster of sympathisers had gathered in the hills above the pub. Ned braved all and slipped through the police lines to tell them to stay away. This was his fight. In a final act that would immortalise him in folklore, he returned in a single-handed assault on the police to rescue his mates.
This is his apparition lurching out of the mist, which the police describe so vividly. This seemingly invincible figure. They fire their guns at it and the bullets bounce off the body. It's beating its breastplate with a revolver butt. Taunting the police, taunting them. And then, of course, he's brought down by the pragmatic Sergeant Steele, who levels a shotgun at the legs, and down he comes. Finally, they have their nemesis. Here he is. He's wounded, he's losing a lot of blood, they doubt he'll live. But they finally got him. They've got this man called Ned Kelly.
His last stand may have been in vain, but a 19th century paparazzi were crawling all over Glenrowan, ready to propel Ned into the history books. As the hostages ran for their lives, the police torched the inn. The police had not suffered a single fatality. Ned was badly wounded, but still alive. His fight was over. The armour, the icon for which he is best known, was actually his Achilles heel.
This is a reproduction of the armour that's very weighty. Jesus. Oh.
Very comfortable too, being sarcastic.
Excuse me. This is a replica of the armour that Ned Kelly wore at Glenrowan.
And is this the same weight or actually lighter than...
No, it's actually quite a lot lighter. The original was up to about 75 pounds or nearly 40 kilos. And of course, this was the helmet he wore.
Ugh. That makes it all a bit more awkward.
Yeah, no side visibility. Can't see out the side. You can only really see straight in front of you, and as you can see, it's not very suitable for walking around it.
No.
I wonder how you go firing a rifle. You have a rifle? Okay. Empty. Okay. Just have a look at pointing and aiming this rifle. Just turn around
Virtually
there.
an impossibility. I can't even see the sights properly.
So you think that'd be fairly impractical?
Very impractical. It's a very uncomfortable suit to wear.
Well, that probably leads to the fact that Glenrowan, he's known to have used a couple of, you can't see these, can you?
No.
Here they are in your hands. A couple of stolen police Colt Navy revolvers.
Yep.
Now, how's that for mobility?
It digs into the arms a lot when you do lift it up into both shoulders, so holding this stance for quite a long time wouldn't be very good.
Just have a bit of a walk around, just see what problems you have. How was that?
Not very good. I think I would have been dead long ago.
A legend may have been forged and an icon made, but these days Kelly's supporters are desperately searching for higher meaning in Ned's last stand. Glenrowan was no tin pot scheme, they say. It was the first strike of a revolution.
If you take into account its political dimension, then it takes on an entirely new meaning. This is the first step in a very primitive form of rebellion. If Kelly had succeeded, and if by some extraordinary fluke something like a republic had been created in northeastern Victoria, it would be seen as the first blow of freedom struck against the tyrant.
There is no hard evidence that Ned Kelly truly intended to become Australia's Che Guevara. No political manifesto has survived, and no mention of a republic was made at his trial for the murders at Stringybark Creek. But as he was sentenced to hang, 34,000 people petitioned for his reprieve. These disaffected colonists needed a figurehead. It made no difference. In November 1880, Ned Kelly was executed. His last words at the gallows were said to be, "Such is life." Only a few generations later, he is well established as our national treasure. But when it comes to this hero, is there an uncomfortable truth we're unable to face?
Ned Kelly on any criteria is not a hero. He is a cop killer. He is a horse thief. He is a bank robber. He is a terrorist. He is someone who's prepared to take hostages. He is someone who is prepared to plot in a cold-blooded way the possible massacre of 30+ police officers and also have untold civilian casualties. This is not a man that we can justify on any basis as being someone worthy to have hero status.
For most Australians, that Ned Kelly killed does not matter. The truth is that the tale of his struggle still strikes a chord today.
When you talk about a hero, the definition of it being standing up for ideals and a man of strength and courage, you've got to say that that applied to Ned Kelly. He believed in loyalty, he believed in mateship, standing by your mate no matter what, and believing that if I start it, I will finish it. And that's about Australia, isn't it? That's what we hold. Ned's struggle wasn't just about his family, it was about everybody.